Pete Carroll is no longer the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks. We don't know who the head coach is yet, but he's going to stay within the organization as an advisor, which I think is kind of interesting. I can't remember another situation where I've seen that happen. I'm not saying it hasn't. I just can't remember it. What was your kind of reaction to seeing this Pete Carroll news?
It was kind of wild to me just because I don't think Pete Carroll has done that bad of a job over the last couple of seasons. I mean, obviously, as any organization they may want a little bit more progress than what the team has been given, but currently you made the playoffs last year with Geno Smith and you just barely missed it this year, and you probably could have made it. If you would have beaten the Steelers, you probably would have been in a better position to make it. Unfortunate for them that they didn't this year, but I mean, it's not like they haven't had good seasons over the last 5, 6, 7 years, but I was pretty shocked, honestly. I didn't expect him to be one of the coaches to be nixed this week.
Mm-hmm.
I really thought that it was going to be not Pete Carroll. It would have been so many different other coaches, and we've seen multiple coaches, Vrabel being a surprise for us. But, obviously there was a lot of other coaches that we've kind of expected, it was kind of hinted, and we'll get into one more later on in the show. But yeah, I mean, Pete Carroll, I definitely thought was a shock to me. I mean, I think also it's quite interesting that they're moving him to an advisor position. It's almost like the Seattle Seahawks don't want him going anywhere else, which obviously is pretty interesting considering, they let him go as the coach, but they don't want him to go coach anywhere else. So I don't know. I find that pretty interesting. I mean, maybe he'll do well as an advisor or whatever role that he'll have in Seattle, but obviously they're holding on to him for some sort of sake. They don't want him going anywhere else, or maybe they just want to keep it for the fan enjoyment, just like a new fresh start, but they don't want to let go of the history of Pete Carroll, getting them to one Super Bowl and losing, well, 2 Super Bowls, losing one, winning one. But nonetheless, still, yeah, I think it was a shock. It was a shock, more or less. But I mean, he is older though. He's like early 70s, I believe. Like what, 70, 71?
He's 72. He
72.
was the oldest coach in the NFL.
Wow.
So, and that's funny you bring that up. I had that same thought process with you, that I thought it was weird that they didn't want him to be the head coach, but still wanted to keep him around. Kind of that, we don't want you, but we don't want you to go anywhere else. That was kind of my thought too. But yeah, you brought up his age. I mentioned that to my dad because I was like, I was shocked Pete Carroll was fired. And my dad's like, who the heck is Pete Carroll? And I was like, he's the Seattle Seahawks head coach. He was the coach with like this Super Bowl and this Super Bowl. And then he was kind of like, okay. He was like, how old is he though? And I said, he's 72. And my dad's like, he needs to retire. I was like,
yeah, because
he's still ready to go. He's still chewing that gum on the sideline.
I mean,
munching.
Sure, but I mean, like, the thing is it was just like kind of, I don't know, a little interesting that they decided that they wanted to let him go, but they weren't gonna. I mean, I feel like at this point he probably should have retired. He should have pulled some of these this other coach from Alabama that did retire, but maybe he should have just like stepped down and retired, because then he would have been a Seahawk forever.
You can say his name. What's his name?
Nick Saban? Nick Saban?
Yeah, Nick Saban. Let's congratulate Nick Saban.
You want to continue on? I didn't know how long you wanted to talk about Pete Carroll for. So
no. We can go back to Pete Carroll, but you already brought up Nick Saban. So let's congratulate Nick Saban here.
Yeah, congratulations, Nick Saban, on a phenomenal college career. I mean, honestly, probably one, if not the best college head coach of all time. I mean, geez, I disliked Alabama for so many years, but not because of Alabama. It was just because of how good they were. I have nothing against Alabama. It was just that they were just so good for so many years, and you have to thank Nick Saban for that. Multiple national championships, multiple national championship runs, multiple college football playoff runs. Great.
6, right?
I believe so. Yeah. I mean, he's definitely made multiple appearances. He's definitely been in college football playoffs so many times. Alabama has just been one of those elite teams for decades. I mean, he ran the 2010s with Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
So, and he didn't stop this year. He slipped in at 4, and granted he did lose to Michigan, but I mean, Michigan ended up going on to win the Natty. So, I mean, like, it wasn't like he lost to the runner up. So, I mean, he I wish, for him, he could have went out on a bang, but when it's time to hang it up, it's time to hang it up. But he had a phenomenal career, and I wish him nothing but the best in retirement. But let's hope that like nothing crazy happens and he decides like after 1 year of DeBoer, who is supposedly the person going to head coach Alabama next year, who is the Washington Huskies head coach, who just lost in the national championship to Michigan and Harbaugh. He's supposed to take over for Alabama. Let's just hope that DeBoer doesn't do really poorly and then Nick Saban comes out of retirement, because then Nick Saban will no longer be enjoying retirement, and that would just be very unfortunate, because, you know, I think he's had just a historic career. And yeah, I think no matter what, if you watch college football or if you don't, I mean, you at least relatively know some of these like really good coaches. And I think Nick Saban is one of the coaches that many people remember and will know. And I mean, even for you, you know, I know you're not a huge college football playoff, you know, regular season fan much, but you know who Nick Saban was, and you know his greatness. So
he made it into a Walker Hayes lyric.
Yeah. And I guess that's how you first heard his name.
Yeah, that's like, the first time I heard about Nick Saban.
Who is Nicholas Saban?
He's just a random guy in Alabama. But let's get back to Pete Carroll. So weird situation. And I want to kind of go back when the Russell Wilson trade happened. Because I think this is where we really saw Pete Carroll and what he did. When Russell Wilson was traded and that trade went through, everyone thought Seattle had been screwed over. Like, this is the dumbest trade that Seattle could have done. They're rebuilding. DK's going to get mad. This is awful. Like, I mean, we saw all the media. And Pete Carroll came out and he said, hey, no, Geno Smith's our guy. We're not rebuilding. Drew and Geno will be in a quarterback competition. Geno ended up being the guy. They went 9-8 and they made the playoffs. That's very, very impressive to do. And
I'm pretty sure they had a really good showing in the playoff game. I'm pretty sure they kept it really close. They obviously didn't win, but I think they went up against, it would have been San Francisco at number 2 last year.
They either way, making the playoffs at all, because they were supposed to be an awful team. You traded this supposed Hall of Fame quarterback. I'm not saying Russell Wilson is or isn't, but that's what people were saying was, you've traded a Hall of Fame quarterback away. You're going to suck now. You have Drew Lock and Geno Smith. Still made the playoffs. They went 9-8 again this year. Maybe that was part of the reason that, like, maybe Seattle is saying, okay, that's Pete's ceiling now with Geno. But I don't know who you're going to replace him with. I think that was a very good run for the Seahawks and just showed how good Pete Carroll is.
Yeah, I mean, and going back to the Seattle playoff game last year, yeah, they did get blown out, but it was because, like I said, it was close, but it was close. It was close.
They get blown out? Did they get blown out?
It was 41-23, I think, was the final. I looked it up, but in the first half, it was really close because I was like monitoring, because I remember it was a close game. I just forgot at the end San Francisco ran away with it. But Seattle and San Francisco, it was like within like 2 or 3 points at half. It was like unbelievable, because I was like, man, Seattle actually could pick up this big victory over San Fran. San Fran could choke. And sure enough, San Francisco did not. But Seattle did keep it pretty close, which was pretty shocking. So, I mean, going under the circumstances, going into, you know, San Francisco, Levi Stadium, you know, and hoping for the best. And sure enough, you know, doing well in the first half, kind of let San Francisco run away with it in the second half. But yeah, it really does show that, you know, that team, you know, did have a lot of good in them, even it being 9-8 and with Geno Smith.
Who do you think could replace him? Do you have any idea? Or
that I don't know, because I mean, I mean, there are coaches that could, like right now. I mean, there are plenty of NFL coaches that have just gotten fired, but obviously if the Seahawks want to bring somebody from within, maybe like one of their linebackers coaches, maybe one of their coordinators they want to promote, they could always do that. I don't really know. I mean, obviously we kind of have an indication of what's going on and with some of these teams, obviously already kind of having rumors and whatnot, but I haven't really heard much about Seattle or what the direction of coaching will be without Pete Carroll. But yeah, it'll be interesting. I don't really know. I mean, at this point, I thought Vrabel could have went to New England, but maybe Vrabel ends up in like Seattle or something like that. But obviously, anything's possible.
Yeah, so looking at Seattle, you're gonna have to, I think, bring in someone who you know can get it done, especially because you're keeping Pete Carroll in the building. You're
Mm-hmm.
keeping him as an advisor because I think if you bring in someone new who doesn't have a resume as a head coach, then players are going to start going back to, well, what about Pete? Pete's still here. Can we go? What does Pete think about this? They're going to go and ask him questions. And we'll talk about this in a minute, but that was the same reason that Robert Kraft said that Bill Belichick couldn't just relinquish some of his power, was
Mm-hmm.
because players would be like, they're so used to going to Bill. The coaching assistants are so used to going to Bill that you can't have him in the building still. If you're still going to have Pete Carroll in the building, it's got to be someone who like a Mike Vrabel. I think that now that we know he's not going to New England, that's got to be a guy. There's one or two other guys maybe that could become available here. They're not yet, and we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But I think Vrabel is definitely, of the guys who are free right now, he's the leading candidate, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely possible. I don't see like a Rivera going over to Seattle. I really doubt it. But I feel like Vrabel would be the best chance. But obviously, there could be any of these coaches, that may get released, or maybe they're, like I said, maybe they do like decide to work with a coordinator. But like you said, with Pete Carroll still being in the building, it might be tough. Maybe that's why Seattle hasn't really talked too much about getting a new coach. Maybe they're trying to figure out what they're going to do because, you bring in a coordinator that doesn't have experience, because like obviously you have a coordinator like Brian Flores over in Minnesota right now, who has been a head coach for Miami and is now a coordinator over Minnesota. But but like for him, it's like, oh yeah, he already has head coaching experience. Well, not all coordinators have head coaching experience. So you bring in, like, you could say like the coordinator for freaking, I don't know, we could say the Bengals, because you were talking about the
Yeah.
one coordinator that has in a lot of coaching talks right now. So like if he ends up being head coach, let's say he doesn't do real good, and obviously you hope for the best for him, but let's say he's not doing real good at first, they're gonna go to Pete and be like, yo, like, or like go to the organization and be like, well, what do you think Pete thinks about this? What do you think he thinks should be done differently? Because obviously these guys have been, leaning on Pete for many of years. I mean, no matter if they're young or old or however many years, they've, most of those players, like, DK, Lockett, like some of those players have been around for a decent bit of time. So, I mean, like, or even just a year, like a Zach Charbonnet, like, obviously they're still leaning on him at some point during the season. So they're probably going to be like, man, Pete Carroll, what do you think he's thinking about right now? So,
And obviously you still have Bill out there. Bill Belichick is one. Cowboys defensive coordinator Dan Quinn is another one. Has strong ties to Seattle. He's been there before. He was there for the Legion of Boom. He's been a head coach before with the Falcons in the Super Bowl. Um, Michigan, Jim Harbaugh, him coming down maybe to Seattle, that's a possibility. Him and Pete Carroll have had a rivalry. I think they both respect each other though, so that could be interesting to see. And then I don't know. Again, you could go the offensive coordinator there because he has that relationship with Geno already. But I don't know how the players will feel about that, like you mentioned with all that. So hiring within might not be the move. We will see what happens with Pete Carroll. But I would say Dan Quinn, Vrabel, and then like maybe Bill Belichick or Jim Harbaugh would I'd put tied for 3 in those situations would be my rankings.
yeah.
Thanks for watching that video, guys. If you want to check out a most recent full episode of No Buts About It, that's going to be right over here. Yeah, right there. Check that out. And if you just want to see more short clips, we're going to have one right over here for you to watch. Check out No Buts About It on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you listen to podcasts, so you can listen to us on the go. Once again, have a great day and go do something nice for someone.